It is a weekday afternoon in Brussels, and inside the same square kilometer you can find European Commission officials debating trade policy in English, a comic book shop selling Tintin memorabilia to tourists, a chocolatier hand-piping pralines the same way his shop has for generations, and a cafe menu printed in Dutch on one side and French on the other because the law genuinely requires it. This is a country that somehow contains all of that at once, and most people outside Europe still can't confidently point to it on a map. Most of what people think they know about Belgium fits into a gift shop. Chocolate, waffles, beer, maybe the EU flag. All of that is real. None of it explains why this small, flat stretch of land has been invaded, occupied, and fought over so many times that military historians have a nickname for it: the battlefield of Europe. Start with the map. Belgium sits in northwestern Europe, wedged between France, Germany, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands, with a short stretch of North Sea coastline completing the borders. It's small, smaller than the U.S. state of Maryland, and packed with close to 12 million people, making it one of the most densely populated countries on the entire continent. Brussels, the capital, sits almost exactly at the country's linguistic fault line, which is fitting because that fault line is arguably the single most important fact about how modern Belgium actually functions. The country is split into 3 official language communities. Flanders in the north speaks Dutch, locally called Flemish, and makes up the majority of the population. Wallonia in the south speaks French, and a small German-speaking community sits along the eastern border, a legacy of territory transferred from Germany after World War I. Brussels itself, officially bilingual, sits geographically inside Flanders, but is overwhelmingly French-speaking in daily life, a quirk that alone generates a disproportionate share of Belgian political friction. That linguistic split isn't just cultural trivia. It's built directly into the legal structure of the country. Belgium operates under a federal system with regional governments for Flanders, Wallonia, and Brussels, plus separate language-based community governments overseeing education and culture, meaning a single Belgian citizen can, depending on where they live, answer to as many as 4 or 5 different layers of government at once. Road signs, product packaging, and even court proceedings shift language depending on which side of the internal linguistic border you're standing on, and it's entirely possible to spend an entire trip through Belgium without realizing you've crossed what functions, socially and administratively, as one of the most significant internal borders in Western Europe. The question was never really whether Belgium is a small, pleasant European country. It's whether Belgium, as a single unified national identity, was ever fully agreed upon in the first place. Now the part almost nobody expects. This land has essentially never gone more than a few generations without foreign powers fighting over it. The Romans conquered it and organized it as the province of Gallia Belgica, and the name Belgium itself traces directly back to that Roman designation. A rare case of a modern country name coming almost unchanged from a 2,000-year-old imperial province. After Rome's decline, the Frankish kingdoms took over, and for the following 1,000 years this territory passed, in pieces, through Burgundian, Spanish Habsburg, Austrian Habsburg, French, and finally Dutch control, almost never governing itself as a single independent political unit for more than brief stretches at a time. Despite that constant changing of hands, the cities of this region became genuinely wealthy and culturally significant long before Belgium existed as a country at all. During the medieval and early Renaissance periods, cities like Bruges, Ghent, and Antwerp ranked among the richest and most important trading and artistic centers in all of Europe, built on textile production and access to major trade routes connecting the North Sea to the rest of the continent. Bruges in particular was, for a period in the 14th and 15th centuries, one of the most important commercial and financial cities on the entire continent. A level of wealth and influence that modern visitors, seeing its quiet, picture postcard canals today, rarely associate with the city at first glance. Hold on to that timeline. We will get there. Here is a fact that says more about Belgium's founding than almost anything else. Belgium didn't become an independent country until 1830, when a revolution broke out against Dutch rule, and the southern, largely Catholic provinces split away from the northern, largely Protestant Netherlands, which had only been merged with Belgium 15 years earlier at the Congress of Vienna. That split, driven by religious and cultural friction between the North and South, was resolved by creating an entirely new country rather than reconciling the two halves. And it's worth noting that the very same north-south cultural divide that split the Netherlands from Belgium in 1830 has, in a different form, continued to define internal Belgian politics between Flanders and Wallonia ever since. The new kingdom needed a monarch, and rather than choosing a local noble, the great powers of Europe settled on Leopold of Saxe-Coburg, a German prince with connections to both the British and Russian royal families, installing him as Belgium's first king in 1831. That arrangement was as much about balancing rival European powers' interests as it was about Belgian self-determination, a reminder that even the founding moment of Belgian independence was shaped heavily by outside diplomatic maneuvering rather than a purely internal national movement. The Belgian monarchy established then has continued in an unbroken line to the present day, now serving a largely ceremonial and unifying constitutional role, arguably one of the few institutions in the country that both Flemish and Walloon citizens still broadly accept as genuinely representing the country as a whole. Yes, this is the part the title promised, because Belgium's location made it catastrophically unlucky for the century that followed independence. In 1914, Germany invaded neutral Belgium as part of its opening strategy in World War I, triggering Britain's entry into the war and turning Belgian soil into some of the most brutal, prolonged trench warfare in human history. The fields around Ypres, in Flanders, became synonymous with poison gas attacks, staggering casualty counts, and a landscape so thoroughly destroyed that the poppies growing in the churned-up battlefields inspired the poem that gave the world the modern symbol of wartime remembrance. Just over 2 decades later, Germany invaded Belgium again in World War II, and the country's Ardennes forest became the setting for the Battle of the Bulge, one of the largest and bloodiest battles fought by American forces in the entire European theater. The human cost of being invaded twice within a single generation left marks on Belgian society that outsiders rarely think about. Entire towns in Flanders were rebuilt essentially from rubble after 1918, in some cases using town planning records and old photographs to reconstruct medieval buildings stone by stone, rather than replacing them with modern architecture, which is part of why cities like Ypres, almost completely leveled during the war, look convincingly medieval to visitors today, despite most of the visible buildings actually dating to careful 1920s reconstruction, rather than the original centuries-old construction. Belgium's neutrality had been guaranteed by international treaty before both wars, and both times that guarantee was violated almost immediately once conflict broke out, a pattern that shaped Belgian foreign policy thinking for decades afterward, contributing directly to the country's eventual enthusiasm for the kind of collective European security arrangements that NATO and the EU would later provide. But here is the pivot, because the full picture matters more than the headline devastation. Rather than being erased by 2 world wars fought largely on its own territory, Belgium rebuilt, and in the process became one of the founding architects of the very European institutions designed to make sure a third such war never happened again. Belgium was one of the 6 founding members of what eventually became the European Union, and Brussels was selected to host the headquarters of both the European Commission and, separately, NATO, meaning a country that spent much of the 20th century as a battlefield for larger powers, now spends the 21st hosting the institutions built specifically to prevent exactly that from happening again. Here is where the armchair daydream becomes a spreadsheet. Belgium's GDP sits at roughly $670 to $690 billion, with GDP per capita landing around $56,000 to $58,000, placing it comfortably among the wealthier nations in the world by that measure. The economy leans heavily on services, which account for over 75% of output, alongside a still significant industrial base built on chemicals, pharmaceuticals, and one of Europe's busiest ports at Antwerp, which handles an enormous share of the continent's diamond trade alongside its shipping container traffic. Belgium's location at the crossroads of major European transport routes has made logistics and trade a quiet but genuine economic backbone for centuries, long before the EU ever set up shop here. If you have made it this far and you are enjoying the journey, a like and a subscribe genuinely help. No honest account of Belgian history can skip its darkest chapter, and it happened far from Belgian soil. Between 1885 and 1908, King Leopold II ran the Congo Free State in Central Africa as his personal colonial possession, extracting rubber and ivory through a forced labor system so brutal that historians estimate it contributed to the deaths of millions of Congolese people through violence, disease, and the collapse of local food systems under forced labor quotas. International outcry eventually forced Leopold to hand the territory over to the Belgian state itself in 1908, and Belgium continued to formally colonize the Congo until independence in 1960. That colonial history remains a genuinely unresolved and actively debated part of Belgian national memory, with monuments, museum exhibits, and school curricula still being revised and contested in recent years as the country works through how honestly to reckon with it. The scale and mechanics of that exploitation are worth stating plainly rather than glossing over. Leopold never personally set foot in the Congo, running the territory entirely as a private commercial enterprise through appointed agents, who enforced rubber harvesting quotas using mutilation and killing as punishment for shortfalls. Practices documented at the time by missionaries and journalists, whose reports eventually turned international public opinion against Leopold's rule and forced the handover to the Belgian government. Statues of Leopold II still stood in Belgian public squares well into the 21st century, and several have only been removed or contextualized with additional historical information in the years following renewed global reckonings with colonial history, reflecting a national conversation that many Belgians themselves describe as still very much unfinished. But here's a fact that says more about a whole country's modern political character than almost anything else. Belgium's own internal divisions have, at times, made basic governance nearly impossible without any war involved at all. Following the 2010 election, Flemish and Walloon political parties spent 589 days unable to agree on forming a coalition government, setting what was, at the time, a world record for the longest period any democratic country had gone without a fully functioning government. Belgium kept operating throughout that entire stretch. Trains ran, taxes were collected, hospitals functioned, largely because Belgium's federal structure devolves an enormous amount of day-to-day authority to its regional governments in Flanders, Wallonia, and Brussels, each with its own parliament, meaning the national government matters less to daily administrative life here than it does in most other countries. That linguistic and regional divide runs deeper than politics. Flanders has historically been the more economically prosperous region in recent decades, driving a persistent political movement, particularly among some Flemish nationalist parties, pushing for greater autonomy or, in its more extreme form, full Flemish independence from Wallonia altogether. Surveys over the years have shown a meaningful, though far from universal, share of both Flemish and Walloon citizens expressing more attachment to their regional identity than to a unified Belgian one. A genuinely unusual dynamic for a Western European nation this size and this wealthy. Culturally, though, Belgium has produced an outsized global footprint for a country its size. The saxophone was invented here by Adolphus Sax, a Belgian instrument maker, in the 1840s. Comic strip art holds a status in Belgium close to fine art elsewhere, having produced Tintin, the Smurfs, and a comic strip route of building-sized murals painted across Brussels celebrating the medium's Belgian roots. Belgian beer culture runs so deep that Belgian beer brewing traditions, including the country's distinctive Trappist monastery breweries, were recognized by UNESCO as part of the world's intangible cultural heritage. And the rivalry over who actually invented the French fry, Belgium or France, remains a genuinely serious point of national pride here, with most food historians crediting Belgian origins for the dish, despite the name suggesting otherwise. Chocolate deserves its own line in the spreadsheet because it isn't a minor tourist industry here. Belgium is home to thousands of chocolatiers, many of them small, independently run shops using techniques passed down across generations. And the praline, a filled chocolate shell, was invented in Brussels in the early 20th century by a Belgian confectioner rather than imported from elsewhere. That density of genuine, small-scale craft production, rather than mass manufacturing alone, is part of why Belgian chocolate retains a reputation among specialists that mass-market brands from other countries have struggled to match, even as some of the country's own chocolate companies have grown into global corporations. Nature and landmarks here run smaller in scale than in larger countries, but genuinely dense in concentration. Bruges and Ghent preserve medieval canal-lined city centers, so intact that both are UNESCO-recognized heritage sites, drawing visitors specifically for architecture that survived both world wars largely undamaged, unlike much of the rest of the country. The Ardennes forest in the south offers rolling hills and river valleys that feel almost alpine compared to the flat coastal plains further north, doubling as both a hiking destination today and historically the setting for some of the war's most brutal fighting. And Belgium's short but well-developed North Sea coastline remains a genuinely popular domestic beach destination, connected end-to-end by the world's longest tram line, which runs the entire length of the Belgian coast. For anyone actually planning to visit, Brussels is the natural entry point, worth pairing a walk through the Grand Place, one of the most ornate medieval market squares anywhere in Europe, with the EU quarter for a sense of the city's dual identity as both historic capital and modern political hub. Bruges rewards an unhurried day trip more than almost anywhere else in the country, and Ghent, less touristed than Bruges but arguably just as beautiful, offers a genuinely lived-in medieval city rather than one preserved primarily for visitors. Ypres and the surrounding Flanders Fields region remain deeply significant for World War I history, with cemeteries and memorials that draw visitors from across the world every year, particularly around Remembrance Day. And no visit is complete without treating Belgian chocolate and beer as genuine culinary categories worth taking seriously rather than tourist souvenirs. Both industries here operate with a level of craft specialization that easily rivals wine culture in France. So here is the mirror. Belgium has been conquered, occupied, and fought over by nearly every major European power at some point across 2,000 years. Didn't exist as an independent country until 1830, absorbed some of the worst devastation of both world wars on its own soil, carries one of the darkest colonial legacies in modern European history, and still, over a century after unification, remains genuinely divided over what a shared Belgian identity even means. And yet it's also a country that turned that same battlefield history into the headquarters of the institutions meant to prevent future wars entirely, that produces some of the world's most respected chocolate and beer from small family workshops, and that somehow keeps functioning, government crisis or not, because its regions have learned to govern themselves when the center can't agree. Maybe the real question isn't what life in Belgium is really like. It's whether any single answer to that question could ever really capture a country built out of quite this many overlapping, sometimes contradictory identities at once. If you learned something here, that's what this channel is for. Like the video, drop a comment with what surprised you most, and subscribe if you want more of these deep dives. There's a lot more of the world worth actually understanding.